There's a moment that happens in the first few weeks with a newborn that nobody really prepares you for. You've been up for hours, the baby has been crying, feeding, crying again. Your whole body is exhausted in a way that goes deeper than just not sleeping. And then, for no clear reason, your baby settles against your chest. You feel the tiny, rapid drumming of their heartbeat against yours, and something shifts. Not just in the baby, in you. Your shoulders drop, your breathing slows. The tension you didn't even realize you were carrying starts to release. It feels like relief, but it's more than that. It's something older than relief. Something that happens before your brain has time to think about it. That moment has a name in neuroscience. And the research behind it explains something much bigger than just a comforting cuddle. It explains why some people move through life with a deep, quiet confidence that doesn't shake easily, and why others carry a low-level anxiety they can never quite explain. The answer, it turns out, starts here, in those early moments of physical closeness, in the rhythm of a heartbeat. What's happening in that moment isn't just emotional, it's biological, and understanding it changes the way you see early childhood, adult behavior, and even your own nervous system. By the end of this, you'll understand why your nervous system learned what it learned, what that means for how you feel today, and what the research actually says about how deep security gets built. Some of what's coming might surprise you. Some of it might explain things you've wondered about for a long time. You probably know that babies need warmth, food, and comfort. That's the common understanding. Take care of the basics, keep the baby safe, and they'll be fine. Most people assume that what really shapes a child's psychology comes later, when they are old enough to have experiences they can remember, when they can process language, when they go to school, when they start building relationships. That assumption is wrong, not slightly wrong, fundamentally wrong. The research that dismantled this idea started in the 1950s with a psychologist named John Bowlby. Bowlby was studying children who had been separated from their parents during the Second World War, and what he found went against everything that developmental science believed at the time. These children weren't just sad, they were changed. Something in the way they related to other people, to safety, to trust, had been altered by those early separations. Bowlby called what he discovered attachment theory, and it became one of the most replicated frameworks in all of developmental psychology. But it was a researcher named Mary Ainsworth who took Bowlby's ideas into the laboratory. In the 1970s, at Johns Hopkins University, Ainsworth ran a series of experiments called the Strange Situation. She observed how infants responded when their caregivers left the room, how they behaved with strangers, and how they reacted when their caregivers returned. What she found was that babies weren't all the same. They had already developed distinct patterns of relating to their primary caregiver. And those patterns predicted with remarkable accuracy how those children would later navigate relationships, stress, and uncertainty. The variable that made the difference wasn't intelligence. It wasn't temperament. It wasn't socio-economic background. It was the quality of physical and emotional responsiveness in the first year of life. This is where the heartbeat comes in. When a baby is held close to a caregiver's chest, their nervous system registers several things simultaneously: the warmth of the body, the scent, the voice, and the heartbeat. The rhythmic, consistent pulse of another living person. Research published in the journal Developmental Psychobiology has shown that premature infants who received regular skin-to-skin contact, what's known as kangaroo care, showed measurably lower cortisol levels, more regulated heart rates, and faster neurological development than infants who received standard care without that physical closeness. The heartbeat is not incidental to this. It is central to it. The nervous system of a newborn is not fully formed. That's not a flaw in the design. It's the design. Human infants are born neurologically immature compared to almost every other mammal, and part of what completes that development happens outside the womb. through interaction with a regulated caregiver. Neuroscientists call this co-regulation. The infant's nervous system literally learns how to regulate itself by synchronizing with a nervous system that already knows how. A calm caregiver has a slower, steadier heart rate, slower breathing, lower cortisol. When an infant spends extended time in close physical contact with that caregiver, their own physiology begins to mirror it, not as a metaphor, as a measurable biological process. Stephen Porges, a neuroscientist at Indiana University, developed what he called polyvagal theory in the 1990s. His research described how the vagus nerve, the longest nerve in the body, acts as a kind of internal safety detector. It's constantly scanning the environment for signals of safety or threat. And one of the most powerful signals of safety it recognizes is the proximity of a calm, familiar human body, a warm body, a steady heartbeat. When that signal is received consistently in infancy, the nervous system begins to build what researchers call a window of tolerance, a range of emotional intensity that the person can experience without becoming overwhelmed. Children who received consistent responsive physical care in infancy tend to develop wider windows of tolerance. They can handle more stress without shutting down or spiraling. They recover from upsets more quickly. They feel, at some level they can't always articulate, that the world is basically manageable. This is what researchers mean when they talk about secure attachment. It's not a personality trait, it's a neurological baseline, and it begins with something as simple as being held close enough to hear a heartbeat. What's important to understand here is that this process doesn't require perfection. The research is clear on this point. Caregivers don't need to respond to every single cry within seconds. They don't need to be in constant physical contact. What matters is the overall pattern, that when distress happens, connection follows, that the baby learns through repetition that the world responds to them, that they are not alone in their discomfort. That learning shapes everything that comes next. Here is where the science becomes personal, because the nervous system that learned what it learned in infancy is still operating inside the adult, reading this right now. The patterns established in those early years don't disappear. They become the default settings of the autonomic nervous system, the baseline from which everything else is measured. Research by Mary Main at the University of California, Berkeley in the 1980s and 1990s showed that attachment patterns identified in infancy predicted with about 75% accuracy the attachment style of that same person as an adult. Not because people don't change, they do, but because change requires awareness and effort, and default settings run in the background whether you're aware of them or not. This is why some adults walk into a room and feel fundamentally okay, not overconfident, not oblivious to risk, just okay. Their nervous system is running on a baseline that says the world is generally safe, that other people are generally trustworthy, and that if something goes wrong, they'll be able to handle it. And it's why other adults, equally intelligent, equally capable, carry a low-level hum of unease they can never quite trace back to a source. Not a clinical anxiety disorder necessarily, just a background static, a sense that they need to be more careful than circumstances seem to require, that they should be managing something even when there's nothing to manage. Neither of these people is broken. They are both running the software their early environment helped install. If you're watching this and recognizing yourself in that second description, something worth knowing is that this is not a life sentence. The concept of neuroplasticity tells us that the brain continues to change in response to experience throughout life. Adult relationships, particularly long-term relationships with regulated responsive partners, can gradually update those default settings. Therapy, particularly approaches like EMDR or somatic therapy, works in part by giving the nervous system new experiences of safety. Even practices like breath work and meditation, which directly target vagal tone, can shift the baseline over time. The heartbeat that calmed the nervous system in infancy can be replaced to a real degree by other reliable rhythms of safety that the adult brain encounters later. It takes longer. It requires more conscious effort, but the architecture was built to update. Understanding this changes how you see behavior, including your own. The person who has difficulty trusting in relationships isn't being irrational. Their nervous system learned early that closeness comes with unpredictability. It's trying to protect them based on the best information it had at the time. The parent who finds it genuinely hard to be physically affectionate with their children, even when they want to be, may be working against their own early programming, not a lack of love, a nervous system that never fully learned that physical closeness is safe. The adult who becomes overwhelmed by conflict, who either shuts down completely or escalates quickly, may have a narrower window of tolerance built in a childhood where co-regulation wasn't consistently available. None of this is blame. The caregivers who couldn't always provide that regulated presence were in most cases running their own default settings built in their own childhoods. This is how these patterns move across generations, not through genetics alone, but through the nervous system of one person shaping the early environment of the next. The research on this intergenerational transmission is striking. A landmark study conducted at the University of Minnesota, following families across multiple generations, found that a parent's own attachment history was one of the strongest predictors of their infant's attachment security. Not their income, not their education, not their intentions, their own nervous system's baseline. If you've been finding this useful and want to keep understanding how the brain and body shape behavior, subscribing means you'll see this kind of content when it comes out. There's a lot more of this territory worth exploring together. The good news embedded in all of this is that awareness changes the equation. A parent who understands what co-regulation does, even imperfectly, even while managing their own stress and history, can make choices that shift the trajectory for their child. A small but consistent improvement in responsiveness compounds over thousands of interactions in the first year of life. Go back to that moment at the beginning. Baby on your chest, heartbeat against heartbeat, shoulders dropping, breathing slowing. You understand now what was happening there. Two nervous systems in conversation, one teaching the other what safety feels like, one learning for the first time that calm is possible, that the world can be still, that there is a body nearby that will not leave, that will not startle, that will keep its steady rhythm regardless of the noise and the confusion and the hunger. That lesson, absorbed before language, before memory, before any conscious experience the person will ever be able to recall, becomes part of how they move through the world for the rest of their life. It becomes the quiet confidence that some people carry and can't explain, or the quiet unease that others carry and can't explain. Both of them true, both of them real, both of them starting in a moment that seemed, from the outside, like nothing more than a parent holding their child. The science doesn't make that moment more meaningful. It just confirms what some part of us already knew. That being close to another person, really close, heartbeat close, is one of the most important things that ever happens to us, and that the effects of it last much longer than the moment itself. If this opened something up for you, share it with someone who's thinking about early childhood or who's trying to understand their own patterns. And if you haven't yet, a like and a subscribe help this kind of content reach people who could actually use it. See you in the next one.